the home stretch for the day. This is the last panel of FC Build today. Before we dive in, a couple of logistics things. We're still taking signups for the partner office hours that are scheduled for tomorrow. We'll close signups in an hour or so. So at 5 p.m. is a hard deadline for partner signups. So if you want to talk to one of the foundation partners during office hours, definitely sign up before 5 o'clock. We also have company expos from 4 to 5 p.m. There's half a dozen companies or so today, and then another half a dozen tomorrow. Definitely jump into those sessions. You can spend a minute, 5 or 10, or you can spend the whole hour with them. But they'll be walking through product demos and some product pitches in those sessions. But let's come to the last, event of the day. I'm really excited to welcome Sri Shivananda and Chris Young to our conference, FC Build. Sri was the Chief Technology Officer of PayPal, where he leads their global infrastructure team. Before PayPal, Sri was with eBay for more than 15 years, where Sri, you started your career as a software engineer. So you're the engineer who worked his way up. And Sri also serves on the board of directors of F5 Networks. Chris is an EVP for business development at Microsoft, where he leads strategic partner opportunities, alliances, venture investments, and the list goes on and on, Chris. So I'm going to stop at this point. But clearly, you have a large number of teams reporting to you at Microsoft. And prior to Microsoft, Chris was the CEO of McAfee and a senior executive at Intel, and has led cybersecurity efforts at several very large companies, including Cisco. And you've been a founder yourself many years ago, and are now on the board of American Express as well. So two very storied individuals here with us today. So thank you for joining us, Sri and Chris.
Great to be here.
Chris, I'll start with you. First of all, congratulations on joining Microsoft last month, and thank you for speaking with us. Can you share a little bit about your new role?
Absolutely, and thanks for having me. It's always a lot of fun to be able to reach out to the many founders who are working on their next big thing. As you noted, I started Microsoft about a month ago. As you mentioned, I'm responsible for business development, which includes all of our strategic alliances, joint ventures, large partnerships. Think of it as anything that's complex and about really driving long-term future growth. And that does include our venture investment arm, M12. It's been very exciting. As you guys all know, Microsoft is really doing a tremendous job of really trying to drive digital transformation in so many different areas of the technology industry. And that was one of that and, great leadership team was one of the things that attracted me to the company. So diving in, I'm fire hosing right now, as they say, but it's good times.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. And Sri, you're sort of the quintessential case example of someone who's running a very large company that was early to the cloud. And you made a big push a few years ago to move a significant part of your infrastructure to the cloud, starting initially with dev and test. And from what, our conversation last week, you've moved production environments as well. Can you talk a little bit about how that transformation has gone?
Absolutely. So our journey in terms of the public cloud started in 2016 when we started evaluating everyone that was in the industry at that time. And what we realized was at that point in time, the public cloud as an offering and a service was almost a decade old already. So we were not actually early to the cloud. In many ways, we were actually a bit late. That said, financial services and financial technology industry plays by a different set of rules, one that is deeply regulated, and there are a lot of considerations to give in where you host and how you run and how you operate and so on. By mid-2017, we moved dev and test into a public cloud. But what you have to keep in mind is PayPal itself is a family of different companies. The PayPal core, which started in the late 90s and is finished about 20 years. But then acquisitions we have made over time.
Yep.
So we use a little bit of a we love them all strategy. We work, for example, with Microsoft on all our collaboration tools. The whole company is on Microsoft 365. And during a time like the pandemic, it has played an extremely important role in collaboration and communication. At the same time, we have brands like Venmo and Braintree that are on Amazon Web Services. And we have the core of PayPal on Google Cloud platform. Like I mentioned before, 2017, we got dev and test going. We had about 2 years of learning by the time we got to 2019. And as you know, with any transformation, transformations are a combination of shift in mindset, shift in tool sets, and shift in skill sets. And we had to start with
mindset, tool set, and skill sets. I like that.
Yeah, and we had to start with that shift in mindset. The learning we had in dev test, we started to apply that to production. I made a fairly public disclosure last year saying that we'll have a fair percentage of our production traffic in the public cloud by this holiday. And we just finished the Cyber 5 with somewhere between 20 to 25% of all our payments actually going through GCP.
Wow.
So it's been a pretty intense journey. The reason is because you're not just taking a part of your workload and moving it. It's not just a lift and shift. It is so much more. You're changing how you're working. We spent a whole year in developing 4 dozen security controls. And to talk a little bit about that mindset shift, we had to go in the direction of saying, okay, by the time we run any single payment in the public cloud, we had to be fully just in time in terms of our access, zero trust in terms of how we actually build our systems and so on. So we made that the precondition to take traffic. And while doing so, it is not just our public cloud setup that has evolved, but what we do on-prem has evolved with it to the same philosophies as well. So we're still in the beginning of the journey. 20 to 25% of the traffic so far will probably take a couple more years, but we are accelerating analytics workloads. We are accelerating other workloads related to ML and AI. And all of this is now beginning to happen in parallel with a little more momentum than we had, say, 12 months ago.
Yeah. No, I'm sure it sounds like COVID, instead of being an inhibitor in some sense, seems to have accelerated that transition for you. But I'm sure these changes are harder during COVID. So can you talk a little bit about what you had to deal with to continue on this journey over the last year?
I'll say that this journey was not as impacted by COVID, though I think we have benefited for sure. The strategy was always at play. The milestones were always the ones we had. But I'll give you a quick example of something that happened between Retail Friday and Cyber Monday. We decided we needed 8,000 more payments per minute of capacity.
Okay. Between those 2 days, that's in a handful of days.
Yeah, like basically on Saturday, we decided we need 8K more in payments per minute of capacity. The team accomplished that within 6 hours by the time Sunday morning got around. And that would have taken us about 3 months to do on-prem. Also on Monday, I ran an experiment and I told the team, can you tell me the exact cost of our production Google workload for Friday? And they gave me a number down to the exact dollar, which is impossible for me to do on-prem.
You wouldn't even know the number. I mean, you could have a McKinsey consulting project to come up with that number.
Yeah. But the COVID has definitely transformed how we work. I would say there are more success stories in our partnership with Microsoft on the COVID side than on the production workload portions.
Well, I'm sure Chris is curious to hear more about those success stories. Don't tell him about the Microsoft failures. Not on camera.
Now we've loved the partnership. For the first time in the life of our company, every single employee of every single business unit we have at the company is on one collaboration platform, right? And this was not true pre-COVID. And here we are with much better controls, but anyone in the company is on the same file share, same email. And you may go like, what the hell? You're celebrating that? But no, that's how it works with acquisitive companies. And yet here we are with everything on one single collaboration platform, which we appreciate.
That's awesome.
That's great to hear. Chris, I want to sort of get your perspective on some of the same issues that are on the shift to the cloud. early during sort of the COVID transition crisis, Satya had commented that we've seen 2 years of digital transformation in 2 months. Perhaps you can talk a little bit about how COVID has changed the tech priorities of large enterprises and go a little deeper into that statement.
Yeah, I think it has in a number of different ways. It's a great quote, and it really does kind of capture the essence of what we've been through this year, which is almost finished here. But if you think about it, what's changed for large enterprises? Number one, everybody has to collaborate. So Sri's point about being on a similar collaboration or the same collaboration platform is actually very meaningful, because everybody's working from home. It could be a complete nightmare internal to an organization if everybody's setting up meetings and points of connection, which are all digital today in many industries, even in sort of offline industries.
Yeah.
To try to do that with a variety of different tools and collaboration platforms, it'd be very challenging to do that just from a calendaring perspective. So getting everybody online is critical, and having a common set of collaboration tools and capabilities, I think, has become super important. Obviously, if I think about sort of the industry I spent a lot of time in, cybersecurity, that's been a very important add-on component of this shift to digital. Like, as you mentioned, I'm on the board of American Express. A company like American Express was very used to in-office work. It's in a heavily regulated industry. You've got tens of thousands of customer service representatives and such. And overnight, the whole company, had to literally, and I say overnight, but over a very short period of time, the entire company had to go to a remote work environment. Yep. And it starts with collaboration and communication, but it quickly gets into how do we share information in a secure fashion? So, you saw a lot of this, do we have secure connections? So, everybody was scrambling to buy more VPN,
definitely
more VPN capacity in their network. You also saw a tremendous focus on making sure that the end devices that we're all using in our work context were more well secured, better monitoring, more lockdown from a data loss prevention perspective. That's become a huge area of focus. And then just in general, you needed more network security capacity because you're now putting a lot bigger load on the network. And so that's kind of changed. That's kind of got people thinking a lot, and probably accelerated how, sort of this notion of the secure access service edge is starting to play out for a lot of organizations. So, need to collaborate, work remotely, do it in a secure fashion. All that has happened. Then it extends out into the customer base, right? So that's just internal to a company. And what you're hearing from Sri is, I need to now extend a digital transaction capability to my customers in a way, frankly, that, was moving a lot slower in 2019 than as it has in 2020.
Makes sense. Now, the interesting thing is, both American Express and PayPal are loosely the same industry, don't necessarily compete directly on a lot of things, but overlap in some. But with PayPal, Sri, you have what is essentially a digital native company, even as a Fortune 500 company versus a more traditional enterprise like Amex. Curious to hear from both of you how the changes are different for a digital native company versus a traditional Fortune 500 company.
Yeah, so when it comes to PayPal, we've been a digital native company, and therefore, like in terms of the ability for most people to be road warriors as employees is not that hard. That said, have we ever done it at scale before? No. Until you actually hit the terrain, you never know whether the reality is going to work the way you designed it. So we found ourselves in a situation where the decision was overnight. Like literally everybody went home on one day. And within a 3-week period, we realized that there were some portions of our customer support population that were not necessarily enabled. They were actually mostly built for offices with these safe, dumb terminals that connected to central services and so on. Now, for them to carry it home or carry a desktop home, that was not viable.
Yep.
So we literally sourced about 8,000 laptops in a 3-week period and sent it off to these folks so they can be productive. That said, various myths and biases that existed about remote work are all gone. This is the largest remote work experiment ever in the history. It's not even
history of mankind, history of modern society. Yeah.
Right. Now, what I'll say though is moving from 72 offices to 39,000 offices overnight taught us a lot. And that's true of all companies. I'm not just talking about people. It taught us a lot in terms of testing the design principles that we had before, the critical assumptions we had before, the controls we had in place. In fact, we've actually even further transformed security controls this year based on what we've learned, because it was not only we who got busy, because the digital acceptance of payments actually increased our traffic in ways we didn't even anticipate, but even the cyber criminals got busy.
The bad guys got busier.
Right? So we had to, on the one hand, protect our customers, but now also protect our employees, whether they were in their bedrooms, living rooms, garages, wherever they were. You had to start to think in new ways on how to protect all of them beyond the controls you had before. So whether it's a customer side or the employee side, there has been an acceleration of transformation, which might have been on the roadmaps, but suddenly it became a mandate, a must-have, a need, all within the last 6 months.
Makes a ton of sense. Chris, I want to come back to you on this topic because you have so much experience over decades in cybersecurity, and as Sri alluded to, they went from having tens, in some cases hundreds of offices, to having a security perimeter that has tens, in some cases hundreds of thousands of endpoints that have to be protected. So what's your perspective on what's changed from a security standpoint?
Well, it's interesting. In security, we've been saying for years, the perimeter has gone away. That's all changing. I think 2020 was the year that it literally obliterated any additional perimeter that was out there, even in the minds of a lot of IT departments. And it really did push the real frontier and the surface area for attack, out to these, depends on how many people are in your company in many cases, but it pushed it out to the end device. And in many ways, I would argue that the response from the attacker community was relatively predictable. You saw spike in ransomware. You saw a spike in ransomware related to attackers, starting with phishing emails that were COVID related, or, hey, there's a policy change in your organization, click here. Taking advantage of the fact that, people who used to be in an office setting might be able to walk down the hall to get an approval for something, but now they can't get an approval without actually emailing someone.
Yep.
or getting on the phone to do so. And so the attackers took advantage, I think, in many ways, using ransomware as one of their prime attack methods, of what you'd sort of expect. And then on the consumer side, a lot of ransomware that was attached to misinformation around COVID, and the like. And so, I would say that part was known. I think what's probably been more interesting, particularly for this audience, is what Shri mentioned a moment ago, is that, I think really being distributed at an extreme level, and having that happen across the world all at the same time has taught a lot of security and IT professionals a lot more about their device posture, their network posture, their identity architecture, than they had seen in the past. And so, you had different risks that you were managing at a board level. A good example of that risk would be, I have customer service people who I used to be able to I could put a camera behind them to make sure that they didn't bring their mobile phone into the office and take a picture of what was on the screen. Now you have to have mechanisms in the device itself and in the back-end systems to look for fraud and to make sure that you're protecting the end user consumer against data loss or fraud that could happen from an insider attack. That's just one of many examples of new security controls and procedures that had to be put in place for many, many companies, whether they were digital native or not, in order to be prepared to live through what we're still living through today with COVID.
That's super helpful. And, obviously the world of enterprise security has changed completely for all the reasons we talked about and all the ways we just discussed. I'm curious if either of you have a perspective in the world of consumer soft security, because as consumers, we also have, the same, in some ways, similar security challenges. And that ecosystem, I'm sure, is going through its own disruption and innovation. I don't know if Sri or Chris, either of you want to start on the consumer dimension.
Chris, why don't you start and then I can add a couple.
I would tell you the consumer got a great wake-up call this year as well. Consumers generally have been a little bit of a lagging sort of purchaser and user of good security tools. But if you just look at the consumer security landscape, all of those companies are growing.
Yep.
All the ones that are publicly traded, their numbers are going up. Some of that is just because more people are online more often, and so there's more e-commerce, there's more banking.
Yep.
People who might have been reluctant to take advantage of digital transactions, across a variety of different modalities are now doing so, and they're also taking advantage of the security controls that are out there. You're also seeing the consumer security players get more get broader in terms of what they offer. It used to be just antivirus that you would get mostly from a consumer security perspective, but you're now starting to see tools like good password management, good identity capabilities, secure transactions technology, anti-fraud capabilities. I've been really impressed with what I'm seeing in the market right now with companies that are truly innovating around how they help merchants, how they help card issuers deal with fraud. And it's a persistent issue in the industry. It has a tendency to rise in circumstances like we've dealt with this year. But some of the innovation out there has been tremendous, and it's helped companies kind of really maintain and thrive through this time.
Sri, you were going to chip in on that. Yes.
Yeah, I'll add a couple of points. One is when you think of brands like PayPal, we are in a consumer business along with the merchant business. It's a two-sided network. But the number one feature that we have to offer in our products is safety and security. All of us are in the business of trust. And the only way to actually build and maintain trust is to offer the safety and security first, and then convenience. Convenience follows immediately after, but you have to start on the foundation of safety and security. So there are many things that you have in terms of technical controls you put in place, whether it is volumetric protections or rate limiting or credential stuffing prevention and so on the one side. But then as you go further down in the layered security stack that you build these fraud and risk systems that are going further and looking at the quality of every single transaction, the sender, the receiver, their context, their history, and such, with the right kind of authentication and so on, to make sure that every transaction that we take is safe and secure for the consumer, safe and secure for the merchant, and safe and secure for the platform. By the way, all while making sure that hundreds of obligations that we have to jurisdictions and countries around the world in terms of compliance are also met on top. So this of course is a part of what a payment platform is all about. The act of moving money from one place to another has become commodity. That's easy. That's not very hard to do. But doing it in a way that is safe, secure, convenient, and cheap, on the other hand, is where the art is. And that's the barrier to scaling when it comes to payments.
And doing that at scale, as you guys have demonstrated, and repeatedly, I think. We've had a very rich conversation around COVID, around sort of the shift to cloud and the journeys that you have both experienced. I want to transition to talking about sort of the same set of topics from a startup lens. Most of our audience is startup founders. And for folks in the audience, if you have questions, I'm going to start taking audience questions now. So feel free to chip in with questions on the text window. There's an event chat window that you can sort of add questions to. But the thing going through my head is, given all the things that both of you are seeing and experiencing, where do you see opportunities for startups? And it could be in security, it could be elsewhere. If you had to pick idea, and not necessarily pick ideas, but pick problems for startups to go solve, what are some of the problems that come to mind? And Sri, if you want to go first.
Yeah, look, I think the pandemic itself has opened our eyes to biases and myths that we have had around just the ways of working. We know that the future of work is going to be impacted by so many different things. We already have 4 generations of people at work. We now have this aspect of everybody being mostly productive, even in a fully distributed environment. People who will commit to work in different ways, full-time, contingent workers, AWS and gig workers and so on. So future of work has a lot of potential. And that's a space that, of course, a lot of startups should probably start to look at to see how you can help with that future of work. That said, what the pandemic has taught us is a level of self-awareness into questioning ourselves on all paradigms, not just the remote work paradigm, but all paradigms. And that is allowing us to ask the question, what is truly core to our mission? What is context that we should partner on? And what is commodity that we should just buy and integrate? In today's world, like no company is going out there to build payroll or HR software or sales software, or for that matter, collaboration software. We all count on the Microsofts and the Salesforce and the Workdays of the world to do that, right? But as you as startups go through your discovery process, most of you have to be product companies, of course. And discovery is one of the main things that you do. As you do the discovery, have those conversations with enterprises. Ask them what sits in core, what is moving into context, and what's moving into commodity. And wherever you hear more and more in terms of patterns in context and commodity, build that.
That's the opportunity.
Scale very much, like context can also scale, but to a different extent. So that's the advice I'd give.
That's super helpful. Chris, any thought from you? Are there problems that you see that, Microsoft or other large companies are not well suited to solving for, or don't have the bandwidth or focus to solve?
Well, I think that some of it is about timing and what problems do you solve? When do you solve them? And I think, we would tell you that it always requires an ecosystem of capabilities, and I think Sri said it really well. Some things are going to be core, some things will be commodity, some things will be contextual, and it does depend on where you are at any given point in time. What I'm seeing as opportunity spaces falls into a couple of different categories. I think that if anything, this move to a far more digital experience, whether it's what we're doing at work, how we transact and live our lives as individuals and as family members, increasing ability to provide intelligent visibility into patterns of work, into patterns of commerce. I think that's where you're seeing disruption.
Yep.
That's where you're seeing an opportunity. And if you think about it, cybersecurity, if I take that as an example, it's all about that, right? Like the evolution of cyber has been about applying intelligent analytics to information, control sets, et cetera, that we've already known. I used to often say that, I'll give you a very granular example. If you ask anyone who's been in my former IPS teams, I would tell them, the IPS is traditionally a rules-based device. Why is it not an intelligent, analytics-driven capability? And if you look at, what's considered the next-gen IPS today, it's those companies that have basically said, we're going to leave rules behind. They're important, and we've learned from that. But we're going to transition and add more intelligent introspection into the traffic patterns and the context that we can pull out of any packet, as it relates to that particular industry. And I would say that's not just true for cyber. I think that's very true in consumer transactions. I mentioned a little while ago, I'm seeing some really tremendous innovation at how companies are trying to help, organizations like PayPal and American Express and others better manage fraud in this kind of digital transaction-oriented world. Whether it's through analytics applied to patterns of interaction with an application is one way. And we're continuously seeing innovation in that particular space. But I really like this notion of applying intelligence, sort of teaching the individual along the way to, whether it's through workflows or through individual interactions, to get better and better at whatever objective they're trying to accomplish. And I think you're going to see this in all elements of, sort of consumer as well as enterprise software companies.
But I think, Chris, you've picked on something very, it's a trend I'm seeing across a lot of companies where, if you think of application software historically, it was a database. It gave you, some version control, some security around the data, and it had some workflow. I mean, all enterprise software is some combination of the two, and I'm oversimplifying, obviously. And I think the next generation of software is going to have intelligence built in, and that intelligence will allow, you to move from rules to sort of decision based on larger data sets. It will allow you to go from reactive decision making to proactive decision making. It will allow you to sort of start to machine learning and AI is a big buzzword, but we're starting to see, people insert that in some cases and gradually insert it into the workflows where the machine starts to make decisions on behalf of the individual in a cautious way or in a measured way. Are there examples, I think you've touched upon a vein of a huge opportunity. Are there specific examples that come to mind for you? This is a pain point. If you saw someone solving this company, you were going to call up whoever runs Microsoft Ventures and say, we've got to fund this.
As much as I like to think I've seen it all, if there's anything I've learned, I've not seen it all. There's always somebody who's out there that's got that idea. But here's what I will tell you, I'll just tell you, I saw a company the other day. I thought it was just amazing what they were doing in terms of, and it's very timely. They're applying analytics to the, sort of the process, every phase in the process of drug development and discovery, all the way through to shipping a drug out the door. And if you think about that, it's really got the opportunity to literally revolutionize, sort of the healthcare mechanisms that we rely on, which are heavily related to treatments and drugs. Obviously the COVID vaccine, sort of drama that we've watched through the course of this year and are going to live out now for probably another year or so. It's a great example of, needing to apply intelligence to a process that's been a very heavily manual process for a number of years. And that's just one example, I think, of so many places where you're applying, you're not just relying on workflow, but intelligence to actually reshape what we used to think of as a rote process.
Definitely the fact that it took a week to develop the vaccine and it's taken the rest of the year to, figure out if it's safe and to get it through the regulatory hurdles has definitely, opened me up to the idea of there's definitely more technology required there than there is being used today, for sure. I want to shift gears a little bit to sort of this notion of for startups who are trying to sell to Fortune 500 companies or selling to large enterprises more broadly, the go-to-market process is very daunting. And yet some founders get it right and others, fail at it. And in the morning, we had Ali Godsi talking a lot about sort of the Databricks approach to solving that problem and how they've gone about building that go-to-market. We're fortunate here that we have in you, Chris, someone who's executed that playbook probably half a dozen times in your life. And Sri, you're at the receiving end of it probably half a dozen times a day. So I'd love to get two perspectives. Maybe Sri, you can start by talking a little bit about, the startups that do it well. What do they do well? And the vast majority, I'm sure, probably piss you off every now and then. What do they do? Or what should they do differently?
Yeah, I just remembered something about your previous question. If you don't mind, I'll insert it in before I go to the other response. I think we talked about analytics, AI, and ML. And at this point in time, I don't think there is anything that you would build in enterprise technology that can exclude AI and ML as a cross-cutting concern that you should include in your offering. Rules don't scale, manual doesn't scale. That's it. That's the bottom line. And if anyone is trying to achieve scale, it has to be on the power of data analytics and AI. In terms of the
literally every company pitching to you has to have an AI angle. That's what I took away from the founders here.
Not necessarily, but they need to have it as a consideration, right? Because what we've seen is even in something as simple as patching our servers, at least a couple of times every single month across hundreds of thousands of servers, you can't do it without doing the full workload orchestration and the application of machine learning and understanding quiet times and all. Even in something as simple as that, leave alone the more advanced things, right? In terms of startups that I see, I'll call it get it and don't get it, right? Is a few paradigms that I see. One is being too anchored in a thesis that you have. I often see as probably the biggest barrier, and being flexible to take a core kernel of what your thought is and evolve it based on what you hear from the market. I think that is one key thing that everyone has to keep in mind. Second is there is this paradigm of there are 10 companies in the world that want to build everything themselves. There is probably 100 companies that will build a few things and probably partner and buy other things. And beyond that 100, there's a lot of companies that will want to buy everything all the time. And you need to understand the strata and segmentation of your customer base, right? So if in the beginning you're spending a lot of time because these 10 are big and you want to go sell to them and they keep saying, no, we build everything we want, go away, you're spending your time in the wrong place. If you go too far down the tail, you'll actually get a set of people who have a problem but will not necessarily bring any intellectual thought into the conversation on how you can evolve your product. So that mid-100 is probably where you want to start your journey. That's another paradigm. The third one is, I'll go back to the concept I mentioned before. Understand your customer, engage at an intellectual level, understand their philosophies, express your philosophies, understand what their problem statements are, and try and figure out where your solution will actually fit them, right? Don't try to force fit something just because you have a relationship with that company, or for that matter, you believe that you'll be very valuable to them. They need to believe that you will have value for them, right? So those are a few concepts that I just wanted to share.
That's super helpful. Chris, I want to ask you the same question. I mean, you've sold to Global 2000 companies for a large part of your career. What are some of the things that have worked for you, and what are some painful lessons you've learned along the way?
Yeah, I mean, look, I remember trying to sell security before we called it cyber security, which is, it kind of puts it in perspective. Here's what I would say. There's some good news out there, particularly as it relates to startups. A lot of organizations have gotten, they've gotten a lot more proactive about being able to tap into innovation in the startup communities that would potentially partner with them or service them. So the good news is, unlike it was, I'll say 20 years ago, many companies, I think this happens in the banking industry, I know quite often, they have arms in their IT department, people who are kind of responsible for going out, interacting with the startup ecosystem, understanding what innovation is happening, and trying to bring and connect that innovation back into the company itself. And it's not just in financial services. I happen to see that a lot more there. So that's one place where I think startup, like if you're not doing that, you're missing a huge leg up in most cases. I think secondly, the venture community has gotten a lot smarter about bringing this as a value add to a lot of their startups. I mean, the venture community is by no means a monolith. In some ways, depending upon where you are in your life cycle, you might want to think about who you're working with in the venture community and their ability to help open doors and help you not just open doors, but craft that value proposition, as Sri says, to to the right person at the right time in the right places in the enterprise. And then it comes down to a lot of the things that I think, are what separate the successful founders from the rest. It's, do you really know what problem you're solving, and are you doing that in a unique and novel fashion? Are you passionate about what you're doing, and are you able to communicate that unique problem solving and passion and bring it together? Because I think so much of what makes successful founders successful is they connect sort of ideas to execution to problems and with passion, and they make it happen. And some of the founders I've worked with, people I've acquired, the ones that are the best, they're just inherently great at doing that.
In fact, I want to pick on something, one thread from each of the things that you said. In my experience, the best technical founders have this element of storytelling that, Chris, you're alluding to. They're able to articulate what they are doing in a way that customers can understand and appreciate and value. Sort of the notion of benefits versus features, is a simplistic way to put it. But you have to be able to tell that story. And at the same time, I think, Sri, you made a very important point that the founders who succeed have to be able to take the core of their idea and stay true to that, but listen to customers and let the business and the product evolve. I mean, often times I've seen incredibly charismatic founders who tell a great story, but they're banging their head with the same product. And, after 100 customers tell you, we don't want to buy this, there's some lesson there to be learned. And sometimes the technology is amazing. It's just what customers want to buy is a different business model, or they want you to solve a different problem in their organization using the same technology. And I think it's a hard balance, because if you don't have confidence in your sales pitch, it wouldn't survive a few sales calls. But if you are, if you consider all feedback to be irrelevant, that's a problem too. And that balancing act, I think, is what separates some of the successful founders from those that sort of stumble and fail.
Yeah, Ashu, one thing I'll say is successful technology is always respected, right? But a successful product is always relevant. And that's the difference that people have to keep in mind as you go out there to make a difference.
Makes a ton of sense. So we've had a couple of audience questions come in, which tie back to other things in the past. So if you don't mind, I'm going to quickly bounce through a few of those. Sri, this is a question for you. Chris, earlier in the discussion, had talked about DLP. And the question is, how important is DLP for your organization, especially in the SaaS-based environment that you're operating in now?
Yeah, so let me start with DLP as a topic. DLP is extremely critical, right? For an enterprise like ours, we start with the discovery and classification of all of the data in the environment. And we tag and tier all of that data. We have treatments that we apply to each one of those tiers in terms of how that data is handled within the enterprise. Mm-hmm. Then we apply a access control mechanism, including all the way up to just-in-time access on many assets these days for things. Some even have to be approved by the customer in terms of their intent for you to access that information and so on. So you have the data management side of all of this, cataloging, discovery, tagging, treatment, all of that kind of stuff. On the other hand, in spite of all of those controls, you need to have enough in terms of exfil controls. And that's where DLP comes into play. DLP has to apply in every single environment, every single zone that you have built in the ecosystem. Now, I'll move to the SaaS side. The SaaS environment, this may be controversial to say, but it's a little bit like the dark web of the enterprise. And soon enough, I think third party will actually become probably the biggest area of focus. Even so, given like all the things that have happened this year, 3P will become the highest area of focus in technology and information security risk and so on. Enterprises like us, we keep a full catalog of third parties. We actually have vetting processes before we onboard onto them. We have an audit process that runs every single year to make sure that there has either been an improvement, and definitely no deterioration. And then spot checks at points in time to understand what the internal processes are of the third party and such. On top of this, our partnership in the first place only starts if we actually get comfortable with our classification of data being safe in the hands of this third party. I'll take an example of Microsoft again. As you can imagine, email, shared drives are probably where all of the intelligence of the company is sitting, right? Now, Microsoft has given us a security and compliance center, and the security and compliance center gives us extreme amount of deep detail in everything related to every single user and their access in terms of logs and locations and so on. And that is a key thing that you're to look for in your SaaS relationships. Is not just the feature that they offer, but the corresponding supporting needs that you may have from a risk, compliance, security perspective. And those partners will make the best partners in the long term. So all of this together makes for how you deal with the risk. Finally, it's a question of risk and risk mitigation.
Yeah.
Assess it properly, figure out the right controls, walk away from things that don't meet your standards. And last but not the least, the two things, to another question that came up around SonarQube before.
Yep.
The two things that we consider holy are data and code. And those are the things that we want to move the last into the public cloud if possible.
Yeah, the SonarQube thing, and obviously it's hard not to have a panel with the two of you and not talk about what happened at FireEye yesterday. It's definitely raised some questions. Any comments on that? It's a very topical question today.
I think the only thing I would say is it's very important for every cybersecurity organization to be informed about these things in real time, understand the implications, study the countermeasures and put them in place as quickly as you can if you already have not. Those are probably the real-time comments I can make on it.
Well, they have mandates, so that should help.
Yeah,
what about you,
I would
Chris?
say is the incident highlights the challenges around third-party risk. So some of the things Shri said a moment ago about managing third-party risk actively, and back to ideas for newer companies and startups, helping big companies manage their third-party risk on a variety of different parameters, I think is a really important area that's going to get a lot of attention over the next 3 to 5 years. It also shows, the importance of transparency. You never like to see this happen, but I do give a lot of credit to the FireEye team for coming out with it, giving some detail around what happened, and making sure that anyone who could potentially be impacted by it has some knowledge of what to go do next in terms of their own vulnerabilities and their own architecture. So it is important. Unfortunately, security companies are a target because they can be a jumping off point to other kinds of other organizations. It's just another good reminder of the importance of really thinking holistically and having a good, comprehensive, evergreen set of capabilities that you're working around your security challenges there, because the issues never subside. They just morph and change.
Absolutely. We're going to start a wrap up now. There's one question from Harish for you, Chris, if you want to take a crack at it, on how does your venture arm evaluate startups, especially this notion of a horizontal platform versus a vertical single use case platform. I know it's a broad, open-ended question, but if you have a point of view sort of on that, it seems like folks in the audience would be interested.
Yeah, so our venture arm is oriented around looking, we're looking at mostly Series A stage companies in terms of where we're investing. We have tended to be more commercially or enterprise oriented, so B2B kinds of models. But I would tell you that there's been a reasonably broad aperture around the kinds of companies that we're looking at. So some of the, if I think about some of the companies in the portfolio that I've come to know, just in the, I've only been there 3 weeks, but in the 3 weeks I've been there, I have spent some time with the team, and it's pretty broad. We do have some solutions that are very horizontal and cut across different industry verticals, but we do have vertically oriented solutions. So there are investments we've been doing in healthcare, for example, which is just focused on a specific vertical. There's other investments that we're doing in silicon or IoT. So we got a reasonably broad mandate in terms of the types of companies that we're looking at. Obviously, one of the things we are interested in is, how can we help those companies accelerate their businesses through what we're doing with Microsoft? Maybe it's access to our customer base, our tool sets, and the like.
That's super helpful. Thank you so much. Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Sri.
Actually, if you don't mind, just
Please.
want to maybe remind or maybe educate people on the fact that PayPal also has a small venture arm, and the kind of investments we make are primarily in the payment space, either seed or Series A. And most of these are in areas that are what we consider a Horizon 3 area of innovation on the payments landscape.
That's helpful. So, for all the folks out there, definitely, I think if you have a payments company, Sri's been an amazingly valuable partner to a handful of my startups. So I would highly recommend you reach out to him. The way you sort of talk about how to both help and support startups and give them productive and constructive feedback, I think has been one that a lot of my companies have learned from over the years. So thank you very much for the partnership. And thank you, Sri and Chris, for joining us today.